This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with artist and writer David B. Goldstein. We talk about creative personality types, Myers-Briggs, and brainstorming for introverts. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to have David B. Goldstein. He is a writer, artist, researcher, and co-author of the bestseller Creative You, Using Your Personality Type to Thrive. He is the originator of the creative type concept that you may have heard about and speaks about how everyone can be creative in their own way using their natural strengths. And it's my great pleasure to have him on the show today. Welcome, David.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much for having me here.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, it's a bit of a three-ring circus. It's funny, when I sign up to do interviews, I usually pick a clear day on my schedule. And so many things happened this morning already that it's kind of crazy. The biggest thing we're doing is a home remodel. And got my son off to school, had my parents, they were house guests for the weekend to take off. And I have several businesses that I run, including I just got invited to do an art show, which is going to take place next weekend. So it's a last-minute invitation. And a bunch of other things. So it's always a whirlwind of activity every morning, which surprises me.
And then when it comes to writing, how do you your kind of writing process for things? Are you very much writing every day, or do you wait until you've actually got a particular project that you're working on and block out periods of time and just really focus in that way?
I prefer to block out time when that's possible. And I did most of the writing. It's kind of funny, while I was in Hong Kong. I had a very rare opportunity in my life where my wife was offered a position in Hong Kong, and I was obviously going to move with her, but I had one condition that based on the government rules there, I wasn't allowed to work. And I said, I'm kind of a workaholic. It can't tell me I can't work, but they can't stop me from writing and researching. And I had this idea, which we could talk about more later, but this was the perfect opportunity for me to be in a place where I could do a lot of my writing and researching.
And how did you first go about kind of developing your craft as a writer? And obviously, where did this whole kind of interest in creativity specifically come in?
Well, there's a lot to that question. And it's funny. I remember things that shocked me or I just don't believe. And I remember these things through my life. And when I was in third grade, I remember a kid next to me saying that he couldn't draw. And I was shocked that anyone at that age could say they can't do something at that age. And I realized it was a skill, and I was always encouraged by my parents so greatly. And I realized what's missing from this kid. And I've been thinking about creativity, and I've always done creative things all throughout my whole life. And that is really how I got started to think about creativity.
So it began there. And what was your initial thing you were interested in most? Obviously, as an artist and also as a writer and researcher. What was the first love for you?
First love was probably drawing and painting. Then I got very much into black and white photography, and it really wasn't writing. And something else, in English class, I never considered myself a good writer. I had two different types of English teachers. One who said, David has such great ideas. I love what you're saying. And I would get A's in those classes. The next year, I'd have a teacher who cared about spelling and grammar and stuff. I was never good at that. I would get very low grades. So I had a very mixed feeling if I was a good writer or not. People had told me I was. Some people told me I wasn't. But I didn't consider myself a writer. I considered myself someone who has an idea that I wanted to share. And I actually read a book to try to improve my painting. It was called If You Want to Write by Brenda Ullin. It's a book, it's about 80 years old. And the concept of the book is anyone who has great ideas has to find an avenue to express them. And you don't have to be a great writer to express ideas that are interesting to people. And you don't have to be a great painter if you have a great idea. And I always had ideas and I wanted to express them. So I realized writing was just a matter of learning techniques to improve the way I expressed the ideas. And I actually thought I was a pretty good writer by the time I wrote the book. When I got my first draft back from the editors, I kind of was shocked by how much they corrected and how much help they gave me to smooth out the sentences.
But it's interesting because, you know, the core there, the kernel there is having that idea, you know, the idea that you want to share, and writing being the medium in which you want to be able to share it. But unless you have that core idea, and how long, where did this personality, creative personality type, first of all, you're known for really kind of this idea of the creative personality type. Where did you kind of begin to discover that, to kind of start formulating that as a concept?
Yeah, well, it started when around the year 2000, I wanted to take watercolor classes to get back into painting. I had a successful business, but I really needed some kind of creative outlet. So I started taking continuing education classes. And I took several beginner classes, and I felt like they were alienating me. One teacher would say, you have to paint from life. Another teacher would say, you're using the wrong color. They would be generously trying to show their way, but I realized it wasn't my way. And, you know, I saw people dropping out, and, you know, I kept taking class after class and taking different directions. Then I took an advanced class for several years with this other teacher, Jean Gill. And one day she gave us a questionnaire of 105 questions to help us develop our personal style. And all of a sudden I saw this huge connection, this aha moment, because I knew the other people in the class, and I looked at their style, and I realized it related to their personality. And the same time I was taking the watercolor class, I was learning from my neighbor, Otto Krager, who was a world-renowned expert on Myers-Briggs. He spoke everywhere in the world. He was famous for it. He had written 4 best-selling books. And I saw the connection between his work and creativity. And often in Myers-Briggs, I think it's one type of personality that's creative. But I saw how every personality could be creative. And then I realized a lot of people get discouraged away for the wrong reasons. So my thought at the time, I brought it to him. He kind of laughed at me the first time I told it to him. We were both very busy and didn't have time to do much more. But I kept thinking more and more about this concept and building more of a model and seeing more people telling me I'm not creative. And I just wanted to convince them and show them that they are creative in their own way and they could be more creative. And then I saw all these artists trying to develop their own personal style. And I saw how valuable it could be to them. And I even saw, because I work a lot with entrepreneurs and business owners, that they were being creative in their own ways and developing business plans in their own ways. And the more we understand ourselves, the more we can work with our strengths. And I just saw this tremendous value in this. And it was, we all have lots of aha moments, but this was worth, I spent 8 years on it. I thought it was going to take me 6 months. But
and so obviously the Myers-Briggs as a framework has been around for, I don't know, maybe the 50s or 60s. The Myers-Briggs. I'm not sure what the background to that was.
Yeah, it started with Carl Jung, and then during World War II, mother-daughter team developed it into a usable assessment, and it's been very popular ever since.
So what you were able to do was, and we know things like ENFP, or they have the different acronyms and for that, people to remember their Myers-Briggs type. So you were looking to layer on a creativity component to that, because it doesn't really. You see it used a lot within sales, for example. I see Myers-Briggs being used a lot, so people want to become salespeople and they work at their personality types. Well, this is the kind of sales way you need to approach thinking about sales, because maybe you're this type, so you need to spend a little bit more time in the research stage of selling. So when it comes to layering over a creative component to it, where did you even begin? Because that must be a very, Myers-Briggs has taken years and years to kind of develop this thing.
Right.
Where did you go for source material or be able to research? How did that start?
Two different places, well, really 3, but 2 places gave me a tremendous amount of resources. The lake we live in, Otto had lived here for a very long time, and he basically has given everyone in our neighborhood the personality assessment. And we know it's a big social group. And everyone knows their type around here, which it's fascinating in itself. But I was able to interview all these people who knew their type. And then I talked to them about their careers, interviewed them about how they're creative and things like that. But also, what I did while I was in Hong Kong is my goal was to find a creative artist of the 16 personality types. And I did this not by looking at what are images of these artists, but I looked at the original writings they had and what their friends said about them. You could find enormous amount of information on the internet and through these tremendous libraries they had in Hong Kong. So I spent months researching some of the artists who I like very much and try to determine their personality type, and then went back and looked at their style. And the other incredible resource was Otto. He trained, about 80,000 people. He was a genius when it came to understanding personality type, and we had long discussions and talks. And those are really the three ways that I developed this model that fits on top of the Myers-Briggs.
So, and with creative, one of the things I've often wondered about the Myers-Briggs, just as a concept and how it works, that framework, is whether it changes over time. So someone, if they do their Myers-Briggs when they're in their 20s, if it's going to be different from someone that does it in their 50s. And if that is the case, then will the creative personality type of someone change over the years?
Well, the theory is it doesn't really change, but we develop our non-preferences. And it's not like if you like vanilla, you never like chocolate. It's sometimes, most of the time, you like vanilla. And that part usually, well, it might change as far as the vanilla part. But if you're an extrovert, you don't all of a sudden become an introvert. You might learn to appreciate some time alone as you get older. And if you're an introvert, you might start appreciating the time with people as you get older. So it's more of a melding. They call it type development, to be more technical. So the idea is the type doesn't change that much. But what does change, well, sometimes people have found it to have changed when they take a test and a retest, is because we're really supposed to take the assessment with how we actually are, and a lot of times we take it based on our situation. If our work demands us to be very detail-oriented, we might tend to err on saying we're a detail-oriented person, while we might not be. And the idea is think about how you act on the weekend and not necessarily how you might work in situations that the world demands on you. So that causes some people, the personality doesn't change, but the way they perceive their own personality type might have changed over time.
And did you notice patterns in terms of maybe the types of creative work people were doing? They were more like to be one. So, for example, writers, are they more like to be, more introverted? And so on that scale, and maybe scientists in different places. And let's have a think about public speakers, more extroverted. Were there patterns that you noticed time and time again?
There are. And you know what I also noticed? It's also the anomalies. A certain type of person will become an accountant, for example. But some of the most successful accountants don't fit that mold, because today our gifts, our greatest strengths come from being different, because we're competing against everyone in the world, and everyone brings different things to the table. So if you're an accountant who happens to love change, you are going to succeed for a different reason than an accountant who likes to close and open the books. So there's really room for everyone. And when it comes to art, I believe, and something that we found, is that art and music and literature, during certain times in history, a certain type was accepted. For example, during the Renaissance, people wanted to be very detail-oriented, when during the Expressionist time, they were much freer and abstract. And during certain times and periods in history, certain types of people got drawn to the arts, and they wouldn't have if there was a different history. But now everything is opened. Right now there's channels for everything. So everyone could use their own strengths in their own ways to be creative.
And then when you, I know you work a lot with organizations as well. So when you start to move that into, so it's not just individual creative personality types, but when you're dealing with groups of people, teams of people with maybe some of them have very different types of creative personality types, what challenges and opportunities then start to arise when you're in that situation?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is often when we hire people, when we surround ourselves with friends, when we join a group, we join like groups which are very much like ours. And if you did a personality assessment of a group, you probably find a lot of people who are very similar. And what happens is this becomes like a silo. there's great diversity in having people join groups and being part of groups and having friends who are very, very different. And it causes the most friction if they don't understand that it's only a personality type difference. You know, you go to a meeting and some people are thinking, they're talking about future problems and how to solve things theoretically. And that drives the people who care about the immediate details of the problems today crazy. And vice versa. But if the two groups realize that it's a personality difference and the people trying to solve immediate problems today need to look to the future and some abstract answers might be worthwhile, and vice versa, you build very strong teams by having people with different, diverse personality types.
So let's say when an organization, a team of people, all different creative personality types, when they're asked to look at a problem, look at maybe it's something in a product, a new way of marketing a product, or a new way of designing something, and that classic thing I said, okay, everyone can get into a room, let's do a kind of initial brainstorming session to look at what some of the things are we need to be thinking about here. Are there any tips then that maybe once you kind of know that everyone has different preferences and different creative personality types, that you might want to approach that brainstorming session, which you might not have considered before if you'd not known about this idea of creative personality type?
Sure, and that's a great example of brainstorming session. And a brainstorming session, it's probably preferred by one personality type, extroverted people, big picture thinkers, which is intuitive, possibly the feeling type, which is more comfortable being around big groups of people and understanding and promoting harmony among people, and perceiving types who, I'm not getting into all the personality types here. We do that in our book, but people who are very open to changing positions, and they're very spontaneous. The idea is that not everyone is like that, and someone who's introverted might not speak up in the meeting, and they might not share their best ideas, and they might not even have their best ideas. And worse, often they'll feel discouraged because people at the end of the meeting says, "Oh, David, you didn't say anything. Oh, you're not very creative today." And then they'll start feeling not very creative. But if you give them an opportunity beforehand to look at the ideas and think about them, and if you give them an opportunity to reflect on the ideas and an avenue to contribute later, and if you give everyone a chance to go around and say, "What do you think about this?" so people don't have to jump into the conversation. There's all kinds of techniques to allow everyone to contribute and to gain from everyone. I gave one talk at a very large association here in D.C., and the head of the association came to me later and she said, "I thought that half my staff was brain dead." She said, "I think they're just introverts. They never talk to me." But then she started talking to them individually in the office, and she realized they had great things to share. And it was a big revelation to her, and it was a really wonderful breakthrough for that organization.
And imagine maybe techniques like brain writing might be more applicable to some of those. So you can, and it's fascinating. I always find, I was speaking at something recently to lawyers and judges about this, and I called it the tyranny of the marker pen. That one person in the room that seems to own the pen, so no one else gets the pen. It's usually the most extroverted, and somehow it's always that person's ideas that get put up on the board for some reason, and that's very difficult for more introverted people as well. So anyone listening just now, one thing is make sure everyone's got pens, so no one dominates the board. So as you before you kind of came into becoming an author, you were an entrepreneur for a long time, building businesses as well. Right. What was holding you back from making that move into really being a writer and doing a lot of what you're known for now, from your position before where you were primarily an entrepreneur?
I'd say the biggest thing that was holding me back is I didn't know how to delegate. And when there was a time when my wife started working in Manhattan, I was living here in Washington, I realized that I couldn't do everything myself, and I started hiring people who were pretty good at what I did. I had several different successful businesses. One was a systems integration business when I started, and then a patent research business, where I had one of the biggest patent research businesses for a while. But I really had this idea that I was the only one who could do things and manage certain things. And I started bringing in people, and I realized they were actually doing it better than I was, and my staff liked them better than me, and it was freeing up my time. So then when I moved to Hong Kong, I realized I couldn't be hands-on at all, and I really had to get it professionally managed. So I have businesses that I really have very little time commitment to, and that really helped free up my time to do more creative things.
And in this journey, this path that you've gone through, can you tell us about a time where you worked on a project, you worked on something, and you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Yeah, you know what I think was a good example of that is, at the time I thought I was a pretty good watercolor artist, and I was living in Manhattan, and I signed up to take a class with this renowned professor, and who was known for his landscapes, and I signed up for a landscape class. And to give you a little bit of background, too, just to make it more horrifying for me, my wife has always been very supportive of everything I do. She really just gave me one rule at all, and she said, I don't want you to do any nude paintings. And she just felt threatened by that. And I said, that's fine. That's not really my thing anyway. So I went to this class. And the first day of class, I sat down. People had been in the class before, and first thing they did, this, very beautiful woman comes in and takes off her clothes. It was a live painting class. And besides me feeling I was betraying my wife, she would change poses every 4 or 5 minutes. And that wasn't how I worked. And my paintings were terrible. I went into the class thinking I was pretty good, but they were terrible in watercolor, trying to do these sketches or paintings in 5 minutes. And people next to me, I didn't realize at the time how good they were, but they were doing really well. And I was just falling on my face day after day. And it was kind of a disaster. I'd walk home just feeling a little bit embarrassed and like I totally forgot how to do anything. But then I realized, well, one thing I realized is the woman next to me, who I was admiring her work, she recently won the American Watercolor Society award for like the best painting in the country, which is like one of the most renowned groups. So I was sitting next to someone who was really amazing in the first place, and I shouldn't have been comparing myself to her. And the other thing I really realized is it was about what I've written in my book, is that my style, knowing my own personality type, I'm introverted. I like to work alone. I don't like to work in a big group. I like to reflect for a long time on what I'm going to do. So these 5-minute poses didn't give me the time I needed to really create to come up with a vision of what I wanted to do.
You were basically being put you were in a situation where it was like the worst for your person, your creative
absolutely the worst
group of people. You're having to, it's changing frequently.
Right.
Yeah. So you were set up to lose there. You could argue, or at least to have a very hard time of it.
Right. And I kept doing it for over a year, just because I was gaining skill. And because it was so challenging to me. When I'm challenged, I'm encouraged. But after a while, I said, I'm never going to create my best work outside of my personality type. And one of the things, it kind of alludes to what you said earlier about that type changing over time. We have the ability to do it. I have the ability to, I got pretty good at doing these 5-minute sketches, but my best work will never come from that. And our best work comes when we're being ourselves. So the more we understand ourselves, the best we could put ourselves in those situations where we'll create our best work. And that's a really powerful thing for creative people to realize.
I suppose that also goes to you where you were talking about that delegation, knowing what was not your key things that you could actually delegate onto other people who that was their thing. That's where they've got their flow state, where they were at their best.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the team that I put together to remodel our house, which was a tremendous 2-year project that's coming to an end, I had the vision of how we're going to do the remodel. I worked with a designer who was very, very detail-oriented, who did all the drawings. He had a lot of experience where I didn't have experience. But everything was designed down to the inch. And then we brought in a builder who was very practical. And when you remodel a house, nothing is to an inch. And he had to make a lot of field decisions. He was very flexible and very practical. So the three of us, understanding ourselves, there's a little bit of friction here and there, but we had a team where we all had different strengths, and we all worked within our different strengths. And of course, the builder expressed his vision sometimes, and it was great. But his strength came from being practical and knowing how to make things work, on the ground. And my strength was keeping the vision in mind as we followed through the project, and it worked out. It's worked out really, really well.
And are there any maybe tips around that? Especially, let's say, maybe someone's doing they're in the kind of creative industries in one way or the other, and they're having to work with a team of people, very different types, or not like yourself previously, they've been an entrepreneur and they're building a business with very different personality types, or even doing something like they're remodeling a home. Is there anything specifically around how best to ensure that communication? Because I imagine communication is pretty critical to this when you've got these different types. How best to ensure that the communication is working as it should be?
Yeah, and I think if it's any kind of formal group, I would suggest trying to take a Myers-Briggs assessment, find a certified professional person to help them work it through. It's one of the most valuable things I found in my career. When I started this project very informally, I kind of handed out my book to all the guys, and I think they got an idea that they were enlightened about personality type, and I think that has helped through this. So it's just appreciating people for their differences. And
I think, we even at my businesses here, we do the same thing. We actually do a Myers-Briggs type test, and because I think, especially when you're and this is maybe a little bit different because it's something I've heard, especially when I worked in Silicon Valley. When you have those first 2 or 3 co-founders, it can sometimes be quite useful to have people that share certain types of personality traits, because in terms it allows for quick iteration of things. But as you start to build, then you want to have more, a larger grouping of ideas and stuff as well. And what we found very early on is that the teams that we were starting to build, they were too much like us. We didn't need another one of us. We needed to, and by having a lack of diversity in that way, we were actually limiting the potential of the growth of that business, and also the growth of new ideas that could potentially have come from that.
Right. And the problem is, and I found that, I could sit down with someone with the same personality type as I do, and, sit down for coffee at 3:00, and we'll close the place at 3 a.m. just talking. But we'll have these great ideas, but there will always be blind sides, because it's a similar way of thinking, and you really have to bring in people who have other ways of approaching situations.
And can you tell us, in this journey that you've gone through, was there any key advice that you got? You worked with Otto Kroger, as we mentioned earlier. Was there any kind of key piece of advice or key inspiration that he gave to you that you really kind of live by and you're using all the time? Tremendous
advice I got from him. And I hear, he died several years ago, right after the book had come out. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life working with him. I hear his wisdom in so many different situations, but one is his overall philosophy was you can never go wrong by learning more about yourself. And that's very, very powerful. The more you learn about yourself and your personalities and your preferences, the more you could self-manage situations, stay calm in crisis, excel with opportunities. It just gives you a really great framework and starting point to do great things.
And it's interesting. I think one of the things about really great literature as well, apart from teaching kind of empathy, it also kind of puts you in the mindset of someone that's not like you. So it makes you kind of reflect on, I suppose, your own, I didn't realize that people think differently. Right. Approach things different. I think that's one of the, and you can actually argue that with art as well. You're working with a lot of artists, and so people that, the way that one person sees a scene is very different from the way another person sees a scene. And that obviously kind of relates to those kind of creative personality types you're talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You go to any art class and the teacher assigns one type of project and you see how many different variations, or an English teacher asking for an essay, how many different styles come through. And the problem is a lot of people who are highly creative and seen as highly creative, they try to teach their way, and they're very generous about explaining what works for them. But if it doesn't work for us, we start to feel alienated. And that's kind of the problem you run into. And people get discouraged away from thinking of themselves as creative. And I see that time and time again. So
it's like when you see maybe on the TV where entrepreneurship, or if you read certain magazines, entrepreneurship is described in a certain type of way. You have to be that alpha, usually male, young. You know, that's the way it's described in that way. You know, real kind of hard go getting. Where and I know you've built a number of businesses and you work with entrepreneurs all day, and you see entrepreneurs come in every flavor type you could possibly imagine.
Absolutely, and you know when I first started as an entrepreneur. What was really lacking is I didn't know how to sell, and I'm not a great salesperson, but I know how to build. I could have a vision. I know how to set up the operations. I know how to make things efficiently. But my best success came from teaming with other companies or people who could do most of the external selling.
That's their USP.
What's that?
That's their USP.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And do you have any online resources or tools or apps, things like Evernote or Gmail, that you love and you often suggest to other people?
I can't say. And the best thing I could suggest to other people is to spend less time in front of screens. I find myself kind of addicted to my iPhone. And I personally, as an introvert, need large blocks of time to think. And some of the best ideas used to happen when I was waiting. And now I don't feel like waiting in a doctor's office, waiting for mass transit or whatever. And I don't have, everything is pushed all the time through our phones. So I don't have those blocks of unexpected time to just imagine. And I've been trying to use my phone less and get away from screens. And ideas, really, I could see the difference between how many ideas come through.
And being a visual artist as well, you often hear this thing like finding your eye as an artist. For maybe people that haven't, they don't come from maybe a visual artist kind of background. Is there anything that you can, maybe tips you can give to people in terms of being able to look at the world in a slightly different way when they're out there, rather than just, you know, it's so easy just going to get caught up on the day to day, everything's going flying past without noticing certain things. I know that any artist I know, they have this ability to be able to just pause and look in a different way than maybe I can look, for example.
I love that question, and I would say that whatever your medium, you know, if I start drawing, if I look out the window and start drawing something, when I go for a walk later, I'll see the world better. I'll see, you have to really look at things, and you could probably do the same thing with photography. Just look at a flower and take your iPhone or whatever kind of camera you have and just really, really look at it and try to find the best composition you could. And just spend a few minutes trying to do something like that. And then when you walk down the street, you're just going to see things more beautifully. The more you think about composition and the beauty and contrasts in the world, the more you see as you just walk through life. And it just makes life more beautiful to be able to see these kind of things, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And if you could recommend just one book to our listeners and one record or album to our listeners, what would they be? Wow,
that's tough. Besides my book, I think I was very influenced by the book If You Want to Write by Brenda Euland. It gives... It frees the spirit. I read it to try to influence me to become a better painter, but it really influenced me that I can be a writer. As far as music, I love every type of music. I used to lifeguard, and every day I sat in a different lifeguard chair. I didn't have a radio. And so I got to listen to everyone else's music every day. But I'd say if I came back to anything, it would be someone like Bruce Springsteen or Jimmy Buffett. But I really loved jazz and classical and everything. But what I like about Bruce and Jimmy Buffett is I don't think they have the best singing voice, but they sing with passion and they have tremendous ideas in what they're trying to express. And to me, that's what rings through. And someone should not be discouraged from being a singer or a musician or an artist if they think they're not very good, because everyone has great ideas. And you just start expressing your ideas. And if you express your great ideas, the grammar part doesn't matter, for example, or the singing voice doesn't matter as much as the passion that comes through.
And for someone that doesn't know much about Bruce Springsteen, hasn't really listened to much of his music, what's the one track they should listen to as an entry into Springsteen?
Oh, that's a tough question. I guess probably something from the Born to Run album, where he just talks about the American dream and anyone can achieve it. And that's kind of what I would say.
Great. And we'll put all these links on the show notes. So people just type in, go to jamestaylor.me, type in David Goldstein, and you're going to get all the links that we're talking about today as well. So final question for you here, David. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you've got are the tools of your trade and the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. You have to restart. How would you restart?
I love that question, and I talk about it a little bit in my book because I call it creative destruction. Someone like Andrew Carnegie, he would destroy a perfectly good steel mill so that he could rebuild it and rebuild it better before the competition rebuilds it. And, I'm sitting here at a desk, which I've had for about 15 years, and I hate it. But I don't have the reason to get rid of it because it's serving a function. But if I didn't have it, I'd reinvent. I'd find something that was much better. I reinvented several times. When I moved to Hong Kong, I started my life again. When I moved back, I started my life again. And what I have, it's not the actual possessions. It's the skills, as I said. It's the personal time I spent learning. And that can't ever be taken away. I could always use it to create again. And if I had a short time to reinvent, I would assess my skills. I would assess the market needs and think what I would like to do. I always think of ideas for businesses, but which one would I like to do? Which one would be fun? So I'd spend a bit of time planning before I jumped into anything. And that's kind of how I'd approach it.
Wonderful. What's the best way that people can connect with you, David, and learn more about your book, your writing, and the other projects you've got on the go just now?
I have a bunch of different websites. I have a blog called Courageously Creative. But the best way to reach me would be through my website, my main website, which is davidbgoldstein.com. There has to be a B. There's a million David Goldsteins out there. You could also search on Google for David Goldstein Creativity, and I'm sure you find a lot of links.
Wonderful. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about creative personality types. I'm intrigued now. I'm going to look at my own Myers-Briggs type and see how that maps onto the creative personality type. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much, James. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.